Today, I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, Swan Private. Now, you know from listening to this show that our money is broken. Fortunately, we have Bitcoin, a better money that will help us build a brighter future. But if you don't have a Bitcoin strategy and a trusted partner to help you execute that strategy, then you're probably going to fall behind. Now, I've known the Swan Bitcoin team for years. The Bitcoiners at Swan are mission-driven and have deep expertise and respect in the Bitcoin space. In my opinion, this is the team you want on your side. Today, I'd like to highlight Swan's Private Client Services division, which guides high net worth individuals and businesses around the world toward building and preserving wealth with Bitcoin. So visit swanprivate.com and learn how this concierge service gives you direct access to your dedicated Bitcoin advisor by phone, messaging, and email. Swan will guide you on complex areas such as self-custody, or you can choose to hold your Bitcoin through Swan with one of the largest US regulated custodians. So make your first purchase with Swan Private and get $100 of Bitcoin. Just tell them that I sent you. You know, an opportunity like this to build and preserve legacy impacting wealth for your family and company will not likely be seen again in our lifetimes. Sign up at swanprivate.com today, mention Breed Love to your advisor, and get $100 in free Bitcoin when you make your first buy. Bruce Fenton, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Thanks a lot for having me. Great to see you.
It's great to have you here. I think the last time I saw you was at the Bitcoin conference in Miami.
Yeah, that's right.
Which was before you announced that you're going to be running for Senate?
I think it was the day. I think I announced like 2 days before because I wanted to. I knew I was going to run, and I didn't want to go down to Miami and not like I wanted to say it, but I also didn't want to announce down there because I'm running in New Hampshire. I didn't think that would be received well, so it was tricky. So I kind of rushed to announce so that I could mention it on the stage while I was down there.
Gotcha. Okay. Very cool. Well, by way of quick introduction for my audience, you are the CEO of Chainstone Labs. You're also a longtime Bitcoiner. And as we just said, recently announced running for the US Senate in the state of New Hampshire. Man, it's crazy to be having a conversation like this because I think even 5 years ago, it would have sounded absurd, right? To have a Bitcoiner running for Senate.
You know, it really is. And it's absurd on a couple levels. One, that I'm a Bitcoiner, but also me personally. I mean, I mean, 5 years ago, it would have been a very different race, I think. And especially kind of pre-Bitcoin, you know, I'm known for Bitcoin and my position in Bitcoin and being known. That's helped this race a lot. That's what got them to notice me right when I announced. It was news. It was news in our community, picked up on social media. It became a real thing just, you know, partly because of this community. So it's sort of doubly ironic and kind of funny. And I think it's great. I hope there's a lot more Bitcoiners that run for office.
Yeah, me too. I think, you know, that's one of the advantages of being in the US is we kind of have these vestiges of decentralized governance still. So it at least gives us a pathway for Bitcoiners to infiltrate the state infrastructure and hopefully start to restore some semblance of freedom and traditional values that this country was built on. So really excited about that. And I've noticed in a lot of your media appearances, you're not pulling any punches. One that I really enjoyed recently was, I think you were asked about what government agencies you would cut or you would like to see cut. And you introduced this answer that was somewhat unexpected, but very poignant, that you think we should cut BlackRock as a government agency. So I would love to just hear I'd actually like to hear your answer to that. Like, what government agencies do you think we could cut? And then maybe you could expand a little bit on BlackRock itself.
Yeah, I mean, we could cut all of them pretty much. And a lot of them we could cut entirely down to zero. And I don't pull punches because I think the Overton window has shifted so much. We have people apologizing for things that everybody knows is bad, you know, like the SEC. Everybody knows AML KYC is bad. I was at a conference one time. It was one of these more statey type conferences, like a FinTech New York kind of thing. And I said, we ought to get rid of AML KYC laws. And they looked at me like I was crazy, you know, but nobody's really arguing that these things are good. You know, most of these agencies that we have all these government bureaucracies, they're not really good. And we all kind of know that, but it's this big administrative state and system that keeps them propped up. So, I think it's good to, kind of mix things up a little bit, speak frankly. I mean, it sounds radical to a lot of people, but it sounded more radical 15 years ago. I was saying a lot of the same things about war and government expansion and these kind of things. It's a little more popular now. But yeah, I'd like to cut them all pretty much across the board. There's some you could do away with entirely. Department of Education, Department of Agriculture. The idea that we have this department of agriculture and it's a bunch of government people who know farming really well and they make farming work for America. It's just an absurd idea. I don't even know much about farming. It's not my field, but I can tell you right now, politicians in Washington, D.C. are not going to make our food better. And if you look at what's out there, food is a perfect example. We literally have obesity and death, actually, because the government is meddling in food. We have terribly unhealthy food because government has gotten involved. And they should be out of it entirely. Let the people make their own decisions about agriculture and education and just about everything else. I'd like to cut them, other than where they're protecting people for protecting their life, liberty, and property. Those are the things that I like to have government for. But other than that, pretty much nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that is the sole purpose of government, really. Life, liberty, property. Anything beyond that is just interference, frankly.
Yeah.
And so I love that you're calling out AML KYC. That's sort of core to the administrative state of just tracking and tracing every financial transaction. Very panopticon dystopian-ish. And it's like, why do we have that? It's totally crazy.
Yeah. And that's a really new thing too. Early in my career, that wasn't the thing. I'm not that old, but there's people in their 20s now. They think it's like this all the time. Like, this is how banking works, or this is how finance works. They have to know your stuff. Well, they don't. They shouldn't. When I started my career, when I was in my early 20s, I was a financial advisor and stockbroker, right, licensed broker, just like I am still to this day. And you could open an account. I could open an account over the phone with somebody, and all I needed was their name and address. I didn't even need their date of birth. I didn't need their social. I didn't need their ID. And they could say, I want to buy Microsoft stock. I'll pay you in a week. And they could pay me in a week. And when they first instituted ID, that was the first time it was done. The older brokers were like, what are you talking about? What do you mean you need your ID to buy stocks? It was as foreign to them as it would be saying you need an ID to buy a television now. Or, you probably do. Everybody wants an ID these days. And it's wrong. It's not their right. It's not the government's right. The government's supposed to serve us and protect us. It's not their right to be up in our business, looking into what we're doing. That's not a legitimate role of them. And it's a relatively new thing that they fooled people into thinking is some sort of thing that's needed to make the economy work, and it actually hurts the economy a ton. So we should just entirely scrap that. Let people do their own thing. And if people commit crimes, if they're doing human trafficking or something, then that's already a crime. The cops should chase that on its own, not using money laundering or chasing money as an excuse.
Yeah, it's a great point. And all of it's sort of doubly bad in a way, because not only do we have to use taxpayer money to pay for these administrative functions and functionaries, but they're also interfering with a free market process. So it's inhibiting wealth creation. It's inhibiting, the rising tide, so to speak. And it seems like, and I know you're a proponent of this as well, if we could just eliminate the monopoly on money, right, or let people choose whatever money they want, that would at least force these administrative functions to sort of prove their value, right? You couldn't just print money to keep growing these things that serve no one and hurt everyone.
Exactly. It's accountability. And you hit the nail on the head. These are the themes that I talk a lot about. The fiat money system, it's sort of triple evil. One, the first level of evil is that it hurts the economy. It hurts people's savings. It robs people of their money. It makes inflation and things like that. Second layer of evil is that it's, it has all of this administrative nonsense that has no accountability. And that leads to sort of this third level, which, I don't use the word evil lightly, but it is actually evil because it fuels stuff that we wouldn't pay for on our own. The things like you just alluded to, we wouldn't voluntarily be bombing Afghanistan for 20 years. If everybody had to pay the bill for 20 years, if all through 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, you're like, oh man, here's my Afghanistan bill again. Another 30 grand a year. And that's what it is. It's an enormous amount per household. You'd be getting your Afghanistan bill like, 30 grand, huh? Hasn't bin Laden been dead 7 years and he was in a different country? Is it really worth 30 grand now? And nobody would pay for it. Same if they were like, hey, I need another 70 grand to keep somebody in a cage over a plant. Be like, wait a minute, you still have people in jail. There's still people in jail in places where weed was legal. There's people that are in there and there's people with like serving 30-year sentences for trafficking. I mean, that ain't worth nobody's money. I don't care how bad you hate weed. I can't imagine anybody who wants to pay $1 million over the course of a prisoner's life to put them in a prison and keep them out of the system. So there's actual evils, with the prison systems and bombings, actual death. I don't use that word lightly, but fiat does lead to mass death, tens of thousands of lives. We can account to it in just the last couple of years in America. More than that if you count Iraq. Well over 100,000 people died.
Yeah, it's truly brutal when you start to look at it that way. I ran these numbers a long time ago, and I don't recall exactly what it was, but I think the war on terror was somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 trillion, maybe.
Yeah.
And this was only through perhaps 2020. So this is maybe like 19 years of the war on terror. And it just so happened we had also printed almost exactly $2.5 trillion in that same time period. So it's this obfuscation, right? Where we're blowing people up on the other side of the planet rather than sending a bill to each individual household where people would have the sticker shock of, what do you mean? It's 30, 50, 60, 70, $80,000 to fund this war. I'm not paying that. The government can just print the money and then blame the price inflation on everyone else, right? Blame it on Putin, blame it on the greedy gas station owners, whatever it is. And that lack of, I guess, traceability and transparency just really works in favor of this, of the unaccountability of this institution.
Yeah, they don't need to give a case for it. In World War II, they had to sell war bonds. You look at the old literature, they were really trying to sell it hard. They don't need to sell this war now. They'll just do it because they don't need to convince you that it's a good idea. They can just have the button be printed and they print the money. So the accountability part is removed. They used to have to make a pitch. And I find it astonishing that they would hire war heroes. They would find the most charismatic war heroes and models and actors and actresses. And they'd hire them to go around and convince people to support World War II. And these people would go and like, hey, listen, the Nazis are invading. And I'm telling you, Nazis are really bad. Here's why. Look what they did at Pearl Harbor. And they'd had to go and say, hey, dig down deep and you got to buy these war bonds. We'll give you the money back. We're good for it. I mean, what a different sale. And for what a different cause. I'm pretty anti-government, but I am in favor of fighting Nazis. World War II, one of the few roles of government that I want to see them do is protect us against even worse governments, even worse statists. And so that was clearly a legitimate conflict. And even for that, they had to sell us on it. They had to come and convince the Americans. They don't have that accountability now. So that's bad because it incentivizes this bad system where they can just print it from thin air and it's incentivized to grow. The war machine wants more war. They want war in Ukraine. They want war in Afghanistan. They don't want these things to stop because it's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's really quite the disaster. And, as I've said a lot on the show, government, well, specifically fiat funded government, is the one organization in the world that is not accountable to its P&L, right? Which means it's not accountable to the preferences of us, the citizens. They don't care what we think because they can just print money and do whatever they want. So intuitively, that's a really bad business for everyone else.
Yeah.
So on that line of discussion, you have this plan to cut government spending, the 3-2-1 plan, I think is what you call it. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that's like a tax cut plan. It would cut the first $300,000 in business income. the first $200,000 in investment income, or I'm sorry, in personal income, and then the first $100,000 in investment income. So if you make more than that, if you make millions, it would cut the first part. If you make anything less than that, you'd have zero taxes. And the cuts to pay for that, it has to be paid for by cuts. We've got to have a lot of cuts across the board. The cuts are actually pretty easy. This bill that they just passed 2 weeks ago would have covered it for an entire year. And the BlackRock bailouts alone would have covered it for almost another year. And if you just, some of these drone bombings and other things like that, very easily you could cover it for 5 years or something. You could say, hey, we're going to give a middle class tax break. Everybody in the middle class, you start a business, now's the time to start a business. You have a side business, major business. Even if you make $1 million on your business, the first 300,000 is tax free. Any side hustle or anything, tax free. Anything under 200,000, tax free. Any gains from your crypto or from your real estate, tax free for the first 100,000. And that just shows how much money is out there, how much, how many cuts are available. I mean, they spend a lot of money. It's crazy how much they're spending. And so I want to put more money in the, just to be clear, ideally, I'd like to cut all the taxes. I don't want to have anybody, pay any taxes. But this is something that, especially when you contrast it to, if you could put this in a one-pager to every single American, and you said, would you rather have the 87,000 IRS agents and this so-called green technology that they just passed 2 weeks ago, or would you rather have 1 year where everybody in all these brackets pays zero taxes? Everybody under 300,000 business income, 200 personal, or 100 or all three of them. I mean, you could have a side hustle business doing 200,000, make $200,000 a year on your job, and make $75,000 on your Bitcoin gains, still no taxes. Would you rather have that? And think about the economic growth that would have. That would affect everybody in America. That would affect the whole middle class. That'd be a lot of money that people would be spending back into the economy. So if you gave everybody in America that choice, I think overwhelmingly they choose this. And if you gave them the choice, would you rather give this to BlackRock or take, 10 months where no American in those, it's basically 90% Americans, no taxes for you for almost a year. That's how much money this is. If we put it in terms of taxes, it's like you have people working for I'd love to know what the BlackRock number comes out to. It's like basically everybody in America worked a couple of weeks out of their year to pay BlackRock. It's just crazy. Think about like your earnings. You work hard, you're doing your thing in a hard field and everything. It's like, just shave off a couple of weeks of your earnings, whatever your tax bill was, like, oh yeah, that chunk went to BlackRock. And so we need to give people the power, put the money back in the hands of the people. So I think that's a nice plan. It's a very simple plan that would help rebuild the middle class, but it's got to start with cutting the spending. The spending's just out of control, and it's too bad. But we're going to have to make some serious cuts. It's just totally unsustainable. Unfortunately, they might not do it. They might just try like Jubilee year and redo it, and they can probably get away with this once more, twice more, maybe. But then it's really, really, really toast. I considered it toast in 2008. I was listening to Peter Schiff and others, and I'm like, this is a joke, $800 billion from thin air to give to Elizabeth Warren's cronies. But now we've got worse and worse. So they'll probably try this one more time. Then they'll do like a debt forgiveness and say nobody has any debt, and they'll come back. And, that might be Bitcoin's time to shine. That we could really see hyper Bitcoinization in that. And it could happen in a couple of years. The world's crazy right now.
Yeah, it's definitely crazy and on an accelerating path. So just so we're clear on that, the 3-2-1 plan, it's essentially zero tax on $600,000 in income, but it's in different buckets, right? 300 was personal income. I think you said 200 side hustle, and then 100K investment income.
Yeah, 300 in business, 200 in income, 100 in investment.
Got it. Business, personal investment.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, it could be six. So you could have 600 total. So if you're a couple, you could have $1 million too. Then it's, because I've had some people criticize and say like, what, this is a penalization to the rich. It's not. It's definitely not, because they get the cut too. If you make $1 million, you get your first. In those buckets, you get your first. So it could be. It could say if somebody's in like the highest bracket, it could end up saving them 90 grand or more, something like that, depending how much they pay in tax, even if they make millions.
Right.
So it'd be a tax cut for everybody. Anybody who's paying taxes would pay less under this plan.
Love that. And then I love too that you connected the dots there with
people working, like people extending their working lives essentially to pay for these BlackRock bailouts or whatever they were, because that's the crux here, right? Is this printing of money is the stealing of time, right? You're stealing people's time, effort, energy, whatever you want to call it, and allocating it to other groups, right? Just completely arbitrarily. So maybe we could double click on that. What happened? What is the deal with this BlackRock thing? They got, I think you said $500 billion of taxpayer funds. This is a private investment organization.
Yeah, they got $500 billion. And it was supposedly to like stabilize the markets, COVID-y, whatever nonsense. And that's all nonsense, by the way. You know, I mean, I know you know that, but and probably most of your listeners know that. You know, there's nothing in some economic, you know, I have Adam Smith back here. There's nothing that's like, oh, if the flu gets really, really bad, print $9 trillion and that will solve everything. You know, that's not a thing. They made a bad reaction, caused all kinds of untold economic damage by shutting down the economy, which has never really been done at this scale. And they try to hand wave like, oh, it was for health, you know, but it is very, very, very bad because the market wasn't allowed to work. You know, what you would have had is people adjusting. And what we saw at the very, very, very beginning of the pandemic, and the hysteria and everything was a rapidly emerging free market. So you heard like, oh, people are paying $99 for a little bottle of hand sanitizer. Truck drivers are going to be paid $300 an hour to go into COVID zones. And that actually would have worked. Crazy thing happened. One, it turned out really quickly. It wasn't as dangerous and deadly as people thought. So, you know, right now truckers do it for a regular price. They don't need $300. There is no COVID zone. It just wasn't as dangerous as they thought. But much more unfortunately, the government just shut everything down and didn't allow that free market to emerge. And they had this weird artificial market, and they really broke the economy. So now to try and fix it, they're doing what they do best, which is break things even worse by trying to print money from thin air. And that won't really work, you know.
Yeah, it's such an important point. I love trying to sum that up by saying that people follow incentives, not laws. So you need that profit motive, especially in times of disaster, to get supply and demand mismatches to clear, right?
Oh yeah.
There's no other way.
Exactly the opposite of what they should have done. And you know, people think this is radical, but it's really based on sound economic policies. You know, they asked me at one of the other debates, what should we have done? How much should we have spent? What money should we have done regarding COVID? And I said nothing. And it's not a matter of my opinion on the illness and you know what COVID-19 is, because even if it was super, super, super dangerous and deadly, 90% CFR, most deadly thing, I still would feel the same way because the market would adjust. If it was that deadly, the market would figure it out. And even if it is that deadly, people still need their own free will. If somebody's 99 years old and a doctor says, look, if you go to this birthday party, you will die. It's 100% sure you're going to get COVID and you're going to die 100%. I'm the best scientist in the world and I'm never wrong. Well, that's their right. They might say, yeah, you know what? I'm 99 years old and I want to go to my grandkid's birthday and that's what I'm doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know,
that's got to be their individual right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the meddling doesn't work. You know, it just doesn't work. Everybody should have their, and you know, things like I respect I come off, you know, I know I'm not for everybody. You know, I turn off some people with some of my opinions. I speak bluntly. Things like Ukraine, I know they're controversial. I actually even push the controversial things out more. When I do the advertising on something like Ukraine, I push it to Democrats and Republicans on our ads. And I know it's controversial. But my point is, and I try and reach other people with this. I respect a lot of people who have different opinions. There's a lot of people, you know, Alex Gladstein, other people who have very different opinions than me on Ukraine. And I respect them. I just want to say, let them have their own ability to do it. And they don't. So I don't want somebody to say, well, I know so much about Ukraine that I think I could take Bruce's money. Bruce doesn't agree with you on Ukraine. And I'm probably never going to agree with anybody on any of that stuff. But I support their right. If they're really convinced, if they're like, hey, look, I did all the research. I'm an expert on Ukraine. I'm 100% positive. Zelensky's our guy. He's the next founding father of the world. He's wonderful. Okay, good. Send them 10 grand then, or go pick up a gun. I mean, if you really believe it, go pick up a gun and fight, you know. And I don't say that facetiously, because it shouldn't be so flippant, like, ah, yeah, you know, I'll just send the troops, just send those poor kids from America, let them go kill and die for Zelensky, just like we flippantly sent them off to Afghanistan and Iraq on other, you know, misguided military misadventures that cost a lot of lives and a lot of money. And we're doing the same thing now. So, but either way, I say let everybody have their own choice. You know, we're not going to agree. Nobody's going to convince me to support Ukraine. So the most peaceful thing to do, instead of trying to steal my money, is just you do your thing. You support Ukraine, and I'll don't. And if you want me to, try and convince me. You know, if you convince me he's a great guy, maybe I'll send 10 grand too. But I just don't want anybody's money stolen, even if I'm convinced. Like, I love NASA. You know, I think NASA's cool, but I don't want to steal your money to pay for NASA just because I think it's cool. You know, I think train sets and comic books are cool too, but I don't want to have a National Department of Comic Books.
It's hilarious. It's like, it's strange that your perspectives here would be controversial, because essentially you're advocating for individualism and free choice and consensual exchange, right? All the things that America was founded upon. So I think if anything, it's a testament to how far afield we've gone from the foundational principles of this country to whatever we are today, that to advocate for the foundational principles is now controversial. It's very, very unusual.
Yeah, the desire of people to get into other people's lives is surprising. You know, I just think people should just mind their own business. It's really the only way to get along in a diverse country, especially now where half the country hates the other half and half the country doesn't believe that the other half knows what is true. We're not going to reconcile these things easier. People talk about a civil war or a national divorce. You don't need that. You just need to let everybody do their own thing. And I wish people were less in their own bubbles with the social media and whatever. You know, they got to get out and about much. You know, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of Democrats who never talk to a Republican. There's a lot of Republicans who never talk to a Democrat. And that's a shame. You know, people should respect each other in our own culture, just as we would respect people in other cultures. I've traveled all over the world. I've met some crazy people who said some crazy things I can't even repeat, who I would never repeat on a podcast, especially as a candidate. You know, stuff that's just the most offensive. I've heard it all because I've been everywhere. And done everything. I've been to all kinds of countries. I've been to, you know, some of the poorest places in the world, poorest places in America. I've been, you know, I've met Taliban. I've met extremists. I mean, you name it. I've met racists. I've met all kinds of weirdos. And, you know, especially in certain circumstances, you could be a minority with your opinion. You're surrounded by people with horrible ideas. And all you can really do is just be like, all right, whatever, you believe your crazy thing, I'm going to believe my thing. And it's otherwise you end up fighting the world. I mean, if I fought every crazy person that I've met in my life, I'd be dead, because I've met thousands of them, and some of them are nuts. You know, I've met, you know, like I said, I've met Taliban before. They're real bad people. But, you know, you got to just let people get along, even if you disagree with them. Just let them do their thing, as long as they're not hurting you. I mean, that is, I'm talking about beliefs only. I'm not talking about actions, obviously.
Yeah, this is, I mean, mind your own business is kind of the crux of it, because ultimately, that minding your own business presupposes there's no coercion, right?
Right.
You know, you do your thing, I'll do my thing. I'll see you in the marketplace. We'll see who wins. So long as life, liberty, property is preserved, everything's good. But clearly we've drifted from this mind your own business approach to socioeconomic reality, specifically with like politicians telling us what money is, for instance. Or as you say, we really need to get the government out of the money business, because it's not about protecting life, liberty, or property. People should be free to select whatever money they want to use, just like they can select whatever television or laptop or any other technology that they want to use. So I know you're an advocate for the separation of money and state. How do you intend on taking that dialogue into the sphere of the Senate?
I think the answer is probably the same way that I talk to people about Bitcoin. A lot of people ask me, what do you say about Bitcoin? How do you educate people about Bitcoin? And I always start with what is money first, because that's, to me, way more important. There's a lot of cool things about the technology and stuff about Bitcoin, but I consider those sort of like chapter 2. Chapter 1 is like, what is money, and why do we care about it, and what makes good money? And then so I talk about the properties of money, and particularly the limited supply. I think that's probably one of the most important features and a differentiator between Bitcoin and fiat. And the fact that Bitcoin's limited to 21 million and fiat is sort of unlimited forever, that's a big deal. And then there's the other properties, how scarce it is one, but also how portable, how durable, how widely accepted, how divisible. These are things that are good properties of money. And I tell people, you can Google properties of money. I first heard of it from Charlie Lee, like probably first speech I ever heard. I think it might have been even announcing Litecoin, or like right after Litecoin or something like that. And he was talking about that. And he just kind of mentioned like, oh yeah, these properties of money have been around for a long time, long before Bitcoin. And so the properties make sense, and Bitcoin stacks up quite well, and fiat stacks up quite poorly. This idea that you can just print something from thin air, and it's a very good fundamental question to start with. What is money? Is it a thing that politicians can just print? Because what you said is perfect. We decide what money is. Why would we decide a thing that they just say is money?
Right.
If you really think about it, if you zoom out a little bit, it's like, well, that's very, very similar to an ICO with a pre-mine, like a pre-mined, like a low grade 2017 vintage ICO. Like, hey, here's a thing. Me and my buddies get a bunch of it, and we're selling it to the public right now. And I've always been, kind of more friendly to these kind of projects. I don't usually use the word scam. I say very bad economics. So something like that, I just consider it very bad economics. And I'm still for it. I'm in favor of everybody being able to sell anything, even junk, even, scams, if they tell the truth, if they say, hey, this is where the money's going. And there's been a couple like that. I mean, there's a couple projects that were like blatantly brazen, like, yes, we are going to take this pre-mine, and the founders get it and it goes into their pocket. It's like, okay, I mean, they're not lying. I'm going to buy a Lambo. Here's the Lambo I bought. Like, all right, I wouldn't do it, but I'm all in favor of everybody else doing it. But the dollar is very, very similar. It's the same kind of scammy behavior, very, very low quality economics. And people should have the choice. They should say, I'm going to choose the dollar, or I'm going to choose X, or I'm going to choose some ERC20 token, or, whatever thing they want, whatever crazy thing they want to do. That's their problem. But now you have people actually looking and saying, what is the reality in the world? And there are real principles of this and properties, and these junky coins like the dollar, they just don't stack up. So I would start with that. And then, the crazy thing is, if I get down there, I think that we're going to face such dire economic times over the next 6 years that anything is possible. I mean, we may have no choice. I joke that even Elizabeth Warren may end up voting with me, but that's unfortunately, I think, a possibility, because I think things are going to get so bad that they're going to have no choice. I mean, we could be in a situation in a couple of years where everything is just completely falling apart, and then we have to make radical cuts and change things around. All it takes is I mean, things go this way until they don't. I mean, you could have one major bill in 2027 or something that's like, okay, this bill eliminates these 30 departments and stops the Fed from printing money, and the US dollar is now one of several currencies, including Bitcoin, that we use. You could have one bill that does that. I mean, there's been crazy bills in history many times, and it tends to happen exactly times like this, when the world gets crazy and everything falls apart. So who knows what can happen, but anything is possible.
Yeah, it's exciting as it is terrifying almost, because the spectrum of possibility is just wide open now. And I love that, you go to the properties of money, because that obviously is the namesake of the show here. And I think once you grasp the properties of good money, you understand why gold became money. You understand why Bitcoin is an order or orders of magnitude better. And that's the light bulb moment. And this idea of printing money, it's almost like a perpetual pre-mine, right? That they can
Yeah.
just pre-mine again. Every time you engage in quantitative easing, you're just undercutting all the dollar holders one more time, right? To fund BlackRock or whoever else is close to the fiat spigot.
Now I'd like to tell you about a great new Bitcoin show on the scene that you've got to check out. Brought to you by Swan Studios and Bitcoin Magazine, this show is Hard Money with Natalie Brunell. Natalie is an Emmy-nominated journalist bringing unparalleled experience to the Bitcoin media scene. And personally, Natalie is one of my favorite voices in the Bitcoin space. Each week on Hard Money, you'll get the top headlines of the week with analysis you won't find anywhere else. Hard-hitting interviews with amazing guests like myself and other top minds in the Bitcoin space. And the show will take you directly into the lives being changed by Bitcoin all over the world. Check out Hard Money at swan.com/hard money. Today, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Crowd Health. So, how does health insurance work? You send an egregious amount of money to an insurance company. They hold it in a pool of depreciating fiat currency. Then, when you have a large health event, you have to pay them even more via your deductible. And then you hope they will cover your bill. And in fact, 1 in 6 bills are denied by healthcare.gov plans. It's time to take control of your own healthcare bills. I'd like to introduce you to Crowd Health. It's a decentralization of healthcare using Bitcoin as an alternative to health insurance. Instead of sending fiat currency to a big corporation, you send that money to an account controlled by you, a portion of which is converted into Bitcoin. Then, if you have a big health event, you have a community of Bitcoiners that will use the money in their accounts to help you out. To get more details, go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove, where you can find the promo code for $99 a month for 6 months.
So this is something I'm really interested into on your platform. You say you want to shrink government and embrace the Constitution. Again, this was foundational to the United States, right? Small, decentralized government, Constitution. The principles of the Constitution, let's say, are almost sacred, almost sacrosanct to the foundation of this country. Can you elaborate on that pathway? How do we get back to smaller government and one that embraces the principles of the Constitution?
Yeah, I see the Constitution as, I mean, it sounds a cliche, but it really is just the foundation of our country. And I see what's so important about it is the Bill of Rights, because that limits government power. It's not something that gives us rights or says a law, here's a thing we can do. It's this thing that says, here's the government can't do. Government shall not do this. Government shall not infringe these rights. And I view that from my studying of history and the founding fathers and the people that wrote it and what was going on and just thinking about humanity and morality and the proper use of force and everything. I see that document and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as very much a leave me alone kind of thing that respects what to me is a very New Hampshire value, very American value, rugged individualism. Leave me alone. I'm doing my own thing. I got my farm here. Leave me alone. If I want to wear a mask, I'll wear a mask. If I don't want to wear a mask, I won't wear a mask. That kind of attitude to me is very American, and I think is protected in the Constitution. And this idea that the founders had of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, very much like what you said, the proper role of government. The Free State motto is that we want to pursue the maximum role of government being protection of life, liberty, and property. So to me, that's what the Constitution is about, just keeping government out of these things. And it's crept the other way now. You have a lot of government involvement in speech, for example. The government shouldn't be telling people what's true. Misinformation should be allowed. It has to be allowed in a free society. And the worst thing you want is the government to be the one who says what's true or not, because then you could have a bad person, and some people feel it already is a bad person, but you could have a bad person. All you are at best is one bad person away from the truth being distorted. If you love Fauci, you think he's brilliant, Well, you still shouldn't be in favor of somebody having that kind of power, because then Fauci could get replaced. Trump could win and replace him with his own Fauci, and you may not like that person. I wouldn't like either of them. I don't want Trump to have the power. I don't want Rand Paul or Ron Paul or my favorite person to have that power. I want the individual to have the power. So that's what we need. We need to get it back to the individuals, give them that more power. And I think to me, that's what the Constitution is all about. Leave you alone. You can say what you want. You can carry a gun if you want. You can't have troops come in your home. You can't have government seize your papers. These are that's the first 4 amendments right there. You keeping the government out of your business is the theme.
Yeah, that's freedom of speech in particular, right, gives us at least the opportunity to figure out what's going on, right? To speak freely is how we engage in this dialogical process to find the truth, right? The truth must always be discovered. If you take that away and give some individual or institution the authority to be the truth setter, obviously things go awry, right? That there's no one or no thing that knows all things or can know the future. So
yeah.
Very self-defeating. It undermines self-organization, right? Which we observe throughout nature, right? Animals kind of left to their own devices, or humans, we organize ourselves. We don't need dictate or fiat to do that. So you've also mentioned the implementation of a universal basic tax cut for the middle class. I take it this has probably been something popular on your platform. Could you elaborate on what that looks like? Is that just are we just back to the 3-2-1 plan?
Yeah. I mean, that's another name for it. It's the same kind of thing, and I like it because it contrasts with Yang's thing. I think is a terrible idea. The idea that you just take money from thin air. And I mean, I can't believe it took off, really. It's like, I know what we'll do. We'll just give everybody money for free. It's something that like a child would come up with. But I, obviously my name is a play on those words. It sounds similar, and it really should be. We should have a universal base. We should be universal, and it should be basic, and it should be a tax cut it across the board. I'd be in favor of any similar plan, a flat tax, deduction for everybody, whatever. But this one, 3-2-1 is something that it really is built from middle class up, ground up, and really would have a real impact. But I'm in favor, like Milton Friedman said, I'm in favor of any tax cut anytime for any reason to anybody.
Yeah, if you don't like theft, then you probably don't like taxation at all, right? And then
exactly,
just to hammer this point home, even when we say money from thin air, it's not actually coming from thin air, right? It's coming at the expense of people saving in dollars, for instance. So it's being extracted from people.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that maybe the success of Yang's platform was an indication of the general ignorance of money, right? That you can just add a bunch of zeros to your bank account or whatever it is, and everything will be hunky-dory. That's not how the world works. And back to life, liberty, and property, you're actually undermining the property of savers when you do that.
Yes.
So it's antithetical to the purpose of government in the first place.
Yeah. And you're messing with the very fundamental foundation of the stuff that's money itself. You're breaking the money. You're actually, you're making this thing that was valuable less valuable. We all have, where is it? I have my $1 trillion. Everybody has $1 trillion on their, Zimbabwe money. Everybody in our industry has one kicking around. I had one on my desk earlier. But they can't, that's the proof that the politicians can't just make money. They can't, it's not real money. And if this was faster, I'm sure when we zoom out the history books, it'll be very, very clear. It'll just be an obvious collapse. Once we stop making it real money. And nobody would look at this objectively. If we went, took aliens from outer space and brought them here, or you took a bunch of, really, really smart kids and somehow isolated them from the world. They didn't know what money was. And bunch of college kids, and you said, okay, here's the euro, here's the dollar, here's Bitcoin, here's this, here's the Yap Island stones. And you gave them all the stats. Nobody would pick the dollar and fiat. It's a silly plan. It might have sounded good 100 years ago, but if the plan is like, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll have, imagine if I was coming out with a new coin, legit for real. Can you imagine if I'm on your program right here and I'm like, yeah, I've got a new coin. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have people in an office and we're going to decide how much. Can you imagine? Imagine the hate I would get. Like everybody in the world would, like, I would destroy my name. It would be like, you're a total scammer. It would be like, it would probably be illegal. I mean, that's how bad the dollar is. If you just copied the dollar, like, oh yeah, my friends are going to meet once a quarter and we're going to decide how much there is. And we're going to give some to the holders and then we're going to give some to our friends. I mean, nobody would fall for this. So it's bad money. They've broken the money. And I mean, I don't know about inadvertently, maybe some of them meant to or knew it would happen. Doesn't matter. It's broken. It's just not good money anymore. And it's such a different mindset, you know. Not that long ago, some matter of decades ago, people were saving and like cash was king. I mean, if you look at the Forbes list, even in the 90s, there was billionaires who were like, yeah, he's a billionaire and he has $5 billion in cash or 2 billion. That was like a big status symbol. Nobody wants cash now. I mean, you and I know a lot of wealthy people. Like there's nobody who's like, oh yeah, I got 2.4 million in my checking account. Like that's not you'd be like, why would you do that? You know, nobody does that. So the money is broken and we all know it. And it's just falling apart right now. So, I think it's inevitable. I mean, as crazy as it, and it's funny, and obviously I love Bitcoin, but it's such a dumb idea. It's like everything's dumber though. It's like this crazy geek money is actually going to work because everything else is so stupid. It's like Bitcoin is kind of a crazy idea. I love it, but I'm not a standard person, but you contrast it with this scam that they've got in fiat. It's like, my goodness, this geek money might actually work because it clearly is better than the nonsense that the world is pushing on us. So I think it's exciting. We could have hyper Bitcoinization.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head. If you tried to pitch a shitcoin that has one node, right, an SQL database at the Fed, we don't know how many dollars are in circulation. We don't know how many dollars will be in circulation. We don't know who's going to decide. We don't know the criteria for deciding.
The meetings are the best.
We're not going to tell you.
Meeting. It's very important. And we make an
announcement
announcement about the meeting 3 weeks ahead. All the press covers our meeting. It's a very big meeting, Robert. Don't you understand?
Yeah, it's so asinine.
It's in a marble building.
And to see the analyst pouring over like the body language and the attire of central bankers, it's a total clown show. And yeah, that's why I guess Bitcoin, it's almost like Bitcoin just has to work because everything else is bullshit essentially, right?
Yeah,
like everything else is a shit coin. You could say gold is maybe not a shit coin in some physical way, but it's not practical to use. Right. Everything else is very much a shit coin relative to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I wouldn't say shit coins like gold. I think gold it's just very inferior. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, you could have silver coins and copper coins. I mean, there's things that have non-zero value, but nothing's close to Bitcoin. It's certainty in an uncertain world. The meeting aspect is the funniest thing. And what you said about the analysts pouring over, I remember when early in my career, Alan Greenspan was the Fed chair, and he had a girlfriend, and they were speculating like, oh, what does it mean? He has a girlfriend. Is he going to be in a better mood? It's like, are you kidding me? Like, that's how you decide how the money is? And there's all these articles about, what it means. And he caught a cold, like literally caught a cold, and people were worried, and the markets were like, oh no, Alan Greenspan's caught a cold. Like as if, and it's not like he's going to die, but even if he did die, it's like, well, no, I mean, no offense, but why should that affect the markets that much? Markets about people. And one thing I love about Bitcoin conferences, people are talking about ideas, not people. And it was very interesting because I went to a lot of Bitcoin conferences, and then I ended up going to one, like a more of a business conference. And it was a real shock because I went in there and everybody's like, oh, this is the chief of staff of so-and-so, and this person knows the such and such. I was like, oh yeah. Ooh, I remember this world, like, no, thank you. I like going to the Bitcoin conference. People are talking about Taproot, all kinds of different technologies and, stuff like that. But the idea that people should be this important is something that we've all got to know is wrong. And especially generationally. I mean, Gen Z is not falling for this. crap. They're just not going to fall for it. There's no way that anybody in Gen Z who's sitting around trading assets on their phone, and they deal with digital assets in their online games, and they own a little bit of Bitcoin, and they know some people who've made money on Bitcoin, they do some trading. They're not going to go into a world and be like, yes, I really want people in a marble office in Washington, D.C. to decide what money is. It's just not going to work. So I think it's inevitable. It's going to come, falling apart. But Bitcoin is, its time is here, because it's certainty in this uncertain world. It's every 10 minutes we know what's true, and we don't know anything what's true. I don't know what's true. They always ask me about things like the election and stuff. I don't know. I wish I knew. I wish I had the resources to really, I'm not going to trust CNN, and I'm not going to trust Fox, and I'm not going to trust the people who say it was stolen, and I'm not going to trust the people who say it wasn't stolen. And I don't frankly have the time or have anybody that I really trust so much, certainly not mainstream news or anybody else. And Bitcoin is one of the few things that I can trust. I also don't know the truth about Ukraine. I don't know about all of these topics. It's impossible for us to have truth. I caution anybody who thinks that they know, because there's a lot of people who think they know about health and truth and Ukraine and every other topic. But one thing we do know for sure, and nobody argues, isn't it fascinating? Zero people argue. There's not a single hater of any credibility ever who's like, no, there really isn't 21 million coins. No, it doesn't have 10-minute blocks. Or no, really, somebody is in charge. There's just no, none of those arguments work.
Right.
We know for sure, whether you like it or not, you think it's a dumb idea or not, we know for sure Bitcoin is certain. And I can depend in this crazy, chaotic, crazy world of nonsense. I can depend on my node saying what's true every 10 minutes. And I get a little sigh of relief with that. I'm like, oh, cool. At least I got my geek money here, my geek widgets that I can trade with Robert and some other geeks, no matter what happens.
Dude, I mean, even in almost like a metaphysical sense, to just have a relationship with truth is of paramount importance right now, when the world is just awash in bullshit. And yeah, the idea, the Greenspan vignette you shared, the idea of one guy's selection of a girlfriend affecting his mood, affecting monetary policy for $4 billion users worldwide. That is insane. I mean, history is going to laugh at us having gone through this, I think, at least. So, okay, another really kind of hot button topic recently is the idea of censorship, digital censorship, in particular, digital deplatforming. I think maybe even you had some of your debates deplatformed off of TikTok at some point. I'm not sure if that was reinstated or not. As senator, how do you plan on dealing with the issue of digital censorship and deplatforming?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I always try and make clear is that I'm not in favor of the government being the solution. I'm a victim of censorship sometimes. I've had some things. It's kind of gray area. The YouTube one, they said it was a mistake. The TikTok, they said it was a mistake and then put it back up. But the fact that it happens is not good. And there certainly seems to be a political bias with a lot of these things. But a lot of it comes from, I get a pass actually as a candidate because they know it's really bad. But like I got flagged because in the debate, the newscaster asked us about COVID policy. So I say COVID policy, and then they're like, "Oh no, you're not allowed to talk about that on social media." That's not right. You have to be able to discuss it in a political setting. There was another one where I was criticizing my opponent on COVID policies, and they flagged it for bullying. They're like, "This is bullying. You're not supposed to bully people." I'm like, "It's a United States Senate debate for the United States Senate. It's an official televised debate held by a university. Like, I was no commentary of it. Wasn't that you can watch the clips. People judge for themselves. So there is a problem with the censorship. But to be clear, I always say these are private organizations and they should be allowed to do what they want, even if I think it's a stupid decision. I think it's a bad decision. I think free speech is good. I think it's bad for their ratings, and it's bad for truth. It's bad for America. We only find what's true by debating. We don't know what's true unless we have an argument. Anything you know is true. You must have had an argument. I'd like to go back and find my early Bitcoin arguments. I'm sure at some point I must have argued with somebody that it could get hacked. I kind of remember vaguely those arguments. I'd love to have videos, because you got to, because I remember early on, I was like, of course it can be hacked. And some people were like, no, it can't be hacked. I'm like, come on. I'm not a computer science, but that sounds like BS to me, to be honest. Like real early in Bitcoin when I didn't understand, I didn't understand that it's a distributed network and that kind of thing.
Right.
So but what a great way to arrive at truth, because you go back and forth and there's a lot of wonderful, good arguments. Somebody will convince, like if I had that argument with somebody now and they're like, no, Bitcoin can be hacked. The developer, Vladimir can hack Bitcoin and give himself 1 million coins. I could explain that. Any good Bitcoiner could explain why that's not true. That's just factually not true. And we could, given anywhere between 5 minutes and an hour, depending how stubborn somebody is, we could provably show them that's just not, it's just not a thing. And so it's good, it's good to have debate. We should have that about the election, about COVID policies, about Ukraine, about everything. And it's very, very dangerous when government gets into the business of saying what's true. So here's what I would stop, though. I wouldn't have any government regulation that says TikTok must allow Bruce Fenton to speak, or YouTube can't censor Bruce Fenton. I'll personally criticize YouTube, but I wouldn't want a government doing that. But what I don't want government involved with speech at all. I don't want the CDC going to YouTube and saying this is true or this is misinformation. Nothing should be considered misinformation. You can't have government be the arbiter of that, because otherwise, what if suppose they didn't steal the election, but they did want to later? Well, then all they need to do is have a playbook and say, okay, we stole the election, and anybody who says otherwise is misinformation. I mean, you can't. You got to think in terms. One thing I think is great in our industry is we think in terms of workable systems. Like, would this work? How would this be corrupted? When we look at tech stuff, and especially this is what I love about like John Newberry and like the high-end Bitcoin developer, like the active real Bitcoin developers, and like NYC Bit Devs and stuff like that. They're talking about these, super minute like attack vector stuff, like if, then it could be attacked. And in politics and in the regular world, there is no if. They're just like, sure, what could possibly go wrong having a scientist in charge of the whole world and being able to shut down 1 million businesses because he thinks he should? What could go wrong with that? Bitcoiners would never go for that. We'd be like, wait a minute, that's not a good system. You need checks and balances. What if this becomes corrupted? What about something where we eliminate the person entirely and have it running based on rules of math and code? That's the way of the future. I think there's something from the decentralized world, the world of distributed ledgers, the world of open source, that I hope that the world can adopt. And I hope we can move forward as people, being more cypherpunk, more open source, more, putting the power with the people. If there was a way for me to run for office as like an anonymous cypherpunk person, just, wearing my t-shirts and nobody even knows my name, I would do that. Politics is kind of like low end. It's like drags me down back into the old world of like, ego and people and self-promotion and stuff like that. But I'd like to see systems like Bitcoin where we just build to make all that irrelevant. Hopefully if I win, I could be one of the people that decreases power of the office. You call me by my first name and, not take very many meetings, just kind of get through it and vote no on everything,
Yeah, no, that's excellent stuff. The adversarial thinking that's inherent to the Bitcoin culture is just so key, as you said, to workable systems. Obviously, I mean, if you're going to design something, you can't, hope is important, but it's not a good strategy. You need to think through all of the possible attack points and secure against them, right? Or design around them at best. And fiat just there's no integrity there. It's just someone kind of imposing an opinion on others, and then those others have to figure out what's best for them. It's not sustainable. And I think you can not only deduce that logically, but you could also observe it historically. Like, fiat currencies always fail. You pass a law and you create you create results counter to the intention of the law. Like it's not a workable mode of organizing human beings, so far as I can tell. So, okay, maybe we can wrap it up on this. A little bit of a tangent. You had this video that went viral where you're explaining DeFi. It's quite hilarious. The DeFi being decentralized finance, obviously. Could you just maybe articulate a little bit about that video and how your experience of it going viral and what that was all about?
It was just kind of funny. I said, let me explain DeFi, and I started out real serious, and then I ended up throwing a piece of cake and lighting the paper on fire. And to me, that's kind of summed up DeFi well. It's sort of a crazy thing that doesn't really make sense. And a lot of, like, the beginning of my video talking about staking, I really put a lot of effort into it. Or I wouldn't say a lot of it. Well, I don't know, relative. I mean, I did. I put a lot of effort into it and never really got, a lot of this stuff just never made sense. And maybe it became because I came from a trading background or something. I came from kind of a Wall Street background. So to me, I just looked at a lot of these instruments like, well, of course, if you have these weird artificial debt things and it's all based on oracles and stuff, there's just so many flaws with that, like emulating stocks, for example. I come from the stock market, and simple example. If you said, okay, I'm going to make a token that represents Tesla stock. Well, for one thing, it's 100% of security in the US. So you have a bunch of regulatory, but suppose you solve that. Well, how are you going to know that that's really representing Tesla stock? Like, you're going to use an oracle, right? Well, that immediately doesn't work, because it works until it doesn't. Any idiot can copy the newspaper or copy what the price feed says and have it, the price match it, until it doesn't. It works until it's just a fake thing that's copying an oracle or a feed, until it doesn't. And then what happens even with real stocks like AMC and GME, you have short squeezes and stuff like that. So suppose this fake Tesla token worked and you could emulate Tesla stock, which I think would be cool, by the way. I like stocks, and I like the idea of stocks trading with Bitcoin. That could make it easier to settle in Bitcoin. But what happens if there's tons and tons of volume? What happens if that token's so successful it ends up with more volume than the real Tesla? What if the real hedge funds start getting in? There's going to be arbitrage and stuff like that. At some point, somebody's going to squeeze this fake. It's a fake instrument. It's not the real stock. At some point, somebody's going to squeeze that. And if it's a big enough thing, like if suppose that became a $5 billion token, like mini Tether, it was representing Tesla stock. Tesla's big enough that it could sustain that in our industry, probably. And then somebody would just squeeze it, and like literally everybody will lose all their money, because it's not a real thing. It's not backed by the real thing. And that's maybe even a better example than some of the DeFi stuff, because some of them, there wasn't even a Tesla behind it. It was just like another token of a token of a token and whatever. And I'm really friendly to experimentation, and I'm quite friendly to stupid ideas. I think it's okay as long as you say they're stupid. I'm against a lot of the economic incentives. I think it's just stupid. Like, nobody should make $30 million because they launched a token. Like, it's just like, especially like exit it. Like, oh, I made a token a year ago and now I have 30 million. That's not, unless the only way you should make 30 million is if you added like way more than that to your shareholders. Like, oh, I invented a new iPhone and I made $1 billion and my shareholders made 300 million and I made 30. That's a much more fair incentive. These tokens, the economic incentives, but I'm all for experimentation. If they're honest, if they say, look, I'm I wouldn't invest in it, but if they're honest and say I'm paying myself $8 million for 12 weeks work because I'm forking Ethereum's code or whatever. All right. Like, I mean, I think it's really stupid. And a lot of the marketing is quite scammy, but I'm all for everybody's ability to try these things. But having said that, I just couldn't find I wanted to like it. I wanted to, because I'm interested in the stock market. I wanted to figure out if there was a way to have DeFi make the stock market work better. And there's some potential things. I mean, there's some neat stuff with, I don't want to sound like I'm promoting these things, because again, most of the tokens are terrible. The incentives are horribly aligned. But I like the idea of like decentralized governance and stuff like that. Nick Szabo has talked about like it's smart contracts. Certainly anything with the stock market. Stock market's a multi-deca-trillion-dollar industry. So I see potential for DeFi maybe being, just ways to make Bitcoin work better. Bitcoin will have to work with more digital assets and more stuff. So I think the stock market will probably be modernized. I hope that out of all these many, many, many experiments, we get some good stuff. But so far, it's been more like my video. Some, unfortunately, and I don't mean to make light of people losing money, but I mean, some of these are really, just bad ideas, and people lost a lot of money. And I'm kind of surprised that so many smart people got taken for it. Just a few weeks before this Luna meltdown, I had, pretty smart person in the space kind of telling me how stupid I was. Like, you really missed out. You're not getting it, Bruce. You're hanging with the dusty old Bitcoin grandfathers who don't get it, and they were talking about their NFT portfolio too, this is a really funny one. It's a quick aside. Like, I should have been like the NFT king or something, because I love art. I love the idea. I actually wrote about NFTs almost 5 years ago in terms of art. And I never ever got into it because like it happened like this fast. I was like, oh, that's cool. That's kind of neat. And I had some friends, some people were going to get me to invest in a couple of their deals. And I thought it was kind of neat because I liked the idea of art and digital, but I didn't quite get it. And then 1 second later, there's like digitally generated things of art that are going for 900 grand or 300 grand. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, I'm an art fan. I have a Jack Kirby original. Like, anybody in comic books would know that's like, I didn't pay anywhere close to that for that. So it's like, you could have Jack Kirby, like a legendary comic book person. You could get an original art from him for 20 grand or something like that. And then you have these things that are generated by a computer going for 300. It just didn't make any sense at all. So that's an area where it's like, I like the concept. I think it would be cool. I wish that you could see, some, I hope that out of the thousands and thousands of projects, I hope there's some cool stuff that comes out of it. But unfortunately, when I see something like these, really, really high values, I just don't see how I believe in digital collectibles, but it's just absolutely insane. 6 figures for some of these things. It's, I don't know. It's an unfortunate thing, but hey, you know what? I view it like the Wild West. Let everybody do their crazy stuff. If people get joy and enjoyment from it, or they like it or whatever, go for it, and maybe we'll all learn something. It might be a lot of learnings, like what not to do, like Luna, right. But we can still have learnings, and that benefits all of open source, and I think it helps the Bitcoin ecosystem overall.
Yeah, agreed. And that, I guess the magic of decentralization is, to use the Szabo term, trust minimization. And like you said, you can't have that in finance because you have the Oracle problem, right? We haven't solved the Oracle problem, which means you need to trust a third party, right? Which is the Oracle, or whatever that data source is. And so in that way, DeFi is kind of an oxymoron. Like, it can't really work, right? There's always going to be a centralized component to DeFi, or some information asymmetry. So I think the video you did was just hilarious and did a great job of highlighting the dumpster fire that is DeFi. Bruce, man, I've really enjoyed this conversation. As a Bitcoiner, I hope to be able to throw my support behind you in whatever way I can as someone running for Senate. So if there's anything I can ever do to help you out, please let me know. And if you could, and you wouldn't mind, please let my audience know where they could find out more about you or your work.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks so much. This is a real pleasure. I'm a big fan, of course, and great to be here. So yeah, my website is brucefenton.com, Fenton. That's also my Twitter handle and my YouTube and TikTok and LinkedIn and everything else. But I'm pretty active on Twitter, like most people in crypto Twitter, or I guess it's now Senate Twitter, New Hampshire Senate Twitter. I do a lot of videos and stuff like that. So, anybody who shares my content is especially useful right now, because the primary is in a couple of weeks. It's just 3 weeks, September 13th. And if I win this, I have a very good chance of winning the general. So all support is welcome. Anybody who knows anybody in New Hampshire, get them out there to vote. And, I do take donations as well. That goes right into educating the public about this kind of stuff, sharing my videos, that kind of thing. And all support is appreciated.
Awesome. We will link to that in the show notes. And thank you again, Bruce. This was awesome.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Have a good one.
You too.